Thank you for coming. This is Silvopastures, how to have your forest and eat it too. My name's Gloria Flora, and I've had a long career in natural resources and in protecting public lands, sustaining public lands. I worked for the Forest Service for 23 years before I resigned to call attention to nefarious things going on in Nevada. And then I started a nonprofit organization called Sustainable Obtainable Solutions. And my husband and I got very interested in permaculture because we were actually doing it, not recognizing that we were doing it. So my husband got his PDC from Jerome. Thank you, Jerome. And I did mine with Oregon State University. And in my work in Sustainable Obtainable Solutions, my nonprofit, I have been heretofore focusing on public lands, but the interface between public and private land is also an extremely important interface. And I'm finding that the agencies are tending to move in the right direction now, at a very slow pace, but they're moving. But we're not seeing as much movement on private land as we'd like. And about 40% of the water in the West comes from private land. And so we need private landowners to be in the game of restoration, of water conservation. I've expanded my horizons with sustainable obtainable solutions and also work with sustainable ag. And this is about silvopastures and how silvopastures can help us address climate change as well as provide us with diversification, economic benefits, and a whole slew of other benefits, which I'll be going through this presentation. So the challenge is, how do we feed and sustain ourselves, our lives, our families, our land, our communities, and 9 billion other people? Because that's where we're heading. Now, granted, there will probably be perturbations that reduce that number, but still, that's a big number, and a lot of people are under pressure and being forced into places where they can't access or grow their own food. And right now, we have industrial agriculture, which is basically a battlefield. And it's commercial interests doing battle with the land, trying to force a profit out of it, using it as a substrate and not recognizing it as a living being. So one solution is no more war. Let's call it off and let's start working in concert with nature. And so agroforestry is really just traditional agriculture and forestry combined. And silvopasture is just one form of agroforestry. Agroforestry can be done in many, many different applications. Some of them are a silvopasture, windbreaks, forest farming, our lovely food forest that we like to talk about, alley cropping, riparian buffers, bioenergy perhaps. There is a nod here to short rotation woody crops. That's kind of soil mining in most places, and so it's not a practice that I recommend. It can work in some areas, but I'm not in favor of producing or growing crops for the purpose of harvesting energy. So silvopasture, it's combining long-term forestry with the more immediate benefits of animal husbandry. And I don't want you to think that you have to start with a forest and then work it backward to a pasture. You can start with a pasture and work it forward to forest. So regardless of which direction you're coming from or what your land is doing right now, you can move towards a silvopasture. And so the basic elements are livestock, soil, forage, and forest. So we have a multifunction forest: food, fiber, fodder, fuel, fungi, fencing, fun, It really is fun. And so what we're talking about here is integration. We're integrating diversity. We're looking at the forage will provide multiple harvests. As the animals eat it, they're actually harvesting that. And it can be in multiple seasons. We have multiple harvests in multiple seasons with the livestock that we're raising, whether they're poultry or four-leggeds. And then in the forest, we have multiple harvests in our tree layers in multiple seasons. So we can integrate a lot, not just with the variety or diversity of the species, but also when we will be accessing them for harvest or when they are meeting peak production. So the elements in silvopasture, it's all about layering. We know that. We're permies, we do guilds. So we talk about multi-layer cropping. Crops, herbs, medicinals, our livestock, mushrooms, florals, natives, understory trees and shrubs, our overstory trees, and interlaced with vines. Your basic guild. A tree. This is my ode to a tree. When I was in the Forest Service, a tree was, the value of a tree was based on what happens after you cut it down, chop it into pieces, and then you put a $sign on it. And we know that is like the last thing that you want to do with a tree, because trees are doing all these other things. And as I mentioned in the last, and I apologize to people who were in the last session because some of these things I'll be repeating, but they bear repeating.
You need to be told twice.
Yeah, okay. I'll tell you what I told you. Okay, so I'm not going to read you the list, but I will point out that trees do some pretty marvelous things, and one of them is communicating. And they communicate with all the species around them. And they send out signals and information, they receive signals and information, and they convey that to others. There are about 230 phytochemicals that are in trees, and we haven't figured out what most of those are yet, or what they do. But they're great communicators. They help enhance the health of the community around them as well as their own health, and they're fantastic for human health. If you walk in the forest for an hour, your serotonin levels, which is the feel-good hormones in your body, will be increased for a week. If you can see trees, likewise, it raises your serotonin levels. A study done within the past 5 years looked at housing projects in an urban environment. Those apartments that could see trees had a 40% lower domestic abuse rate. So trees are way more important than what the Forest Service might define them as, and what we've been led to believe.
Sorry, permaculture newbie. What is a what did you say?
Phytochemical?
Phytochemical?
Good question. It's phyto is Latin for plant, and so it's a chemical that a plant produces. And trees will send that out. We know that trees produce terpenes. That's kind of what makes, on a hot day, a hillside of forest looks wavery. That's because it's sending out these terpenes, which is related to turpentine, and so it's just a chemical, but there are a lot more that we don't necessarily smell, but other forest beings do.
Cool.
Yes, it's very cool.
You bet. Kind of tack on question. I've heard that it's actually the mycorrhizal fungi on the trees that connects the trees together.
That is one form of communication. That's one of them, because trees will send chemicals out in the air where there's not mycorrhizae, but also through their roots. They'll communicate with the mycorrhizae, and the mycorrhizae likewise will feed information back into the tree.
Yeah.
And so the tree can adjust moisture levels in the soil and do all kinds of things in response to the information that it's getting, but it can also send information out. But yeah, the mycorrhizae are a good part. So what are some supporting elements within our silvopasture combination? Well, we can have a whole lot of different things. We can have fungi. We can have wildlife habitat. No, that's another fungi, morel mushroom, firewood, roots, berries, medicinals, pine straw, which is just pine needles that in the southeast in particular, they use this as mulch, and they actually can harvest that and sell it. So you have a whole lot of other elements that you can be introducing into your silvopasture. So when we look at the layers and relationships that we have in the silvopasture where we want or we're developing, we're going to look at the soil, and we want to know a whole lot of information about that soil because we want to know what the soil is going to be capable of, because we don't want to push it beyond its capabilities, or we don't want to demand things of it that it's not going to be able to readily provide for us. So we're looking at type, structure, tilth, which means like the fluffiness of the soil, the drainage, how fast does it drain, what is the nutrient content, the pH, the carbon level, the carbon material that's in there, and overall its moisture holding capacity. All those are important pieces of information. But if you're starting off with a pasture that's open and does not have any shade providing plants on it like trees or large shrubs, you're going to see a different moisture holding capacity after you add those elements of shade. But you need to know what you're starting with. And then when you're thinking about adding trees to a landscape, whether it's just building a guild, a food forest, or whatever, there's a whole lot of considerations with the trees as well. The height to the bottom branches, which is critically important if you're grazing animals. The height of your animal is going to affect where that your trees are going to end up being pruned up to. So the shape. The crown density. The crown density is going to affect what will grow underneath there. The spread, the leaf or needle drop, or fruit drop. It can be annoying if it's something that you have in an area where you don't want a lot of leaves or a lot of fruit or nuts or something dropping on it. For instance, if it's near a place where you're going to be walking, it's really easy to twist your ankle on things if they're dropping out of the tree. So that needs to be a consideration. Accessibility to the edible parts. If you're after something in that tree, know how you're going to get to it. It doesn't do you much good to plant a lovely tree that's going to provide you fruit and surround it with roses and gummies. You'll be a bloody mess by the time you get to the tree to try to harvest it, or the fruit will drop and you can't crawl under there and pick it up. And then the root habits. Is it a long tap root? Is it a spreading root? How much space is it taking up underneath that canopy? Because you don't want to be planting things that are going to be competing and using that same space and looking for the same nutrients in that same location. Likewise, when you're looking at the forage element, what are you going to have in terms of forage? And that can be grasses, herbs, shrubs. It really covers the waterfront depending on the livestock that you're putting on it. So again, height, spread, the root habit, the durability. How long is it going to be around? What are the nutritional values? What's its habit, meaning its shape, its maintenance needs? How do you propagate it? How expensive is it to put it in there in the first place? Can you grow it? Can you spring for 1 or 2 and then start propagating it so you can have 50? Its lifespan, its seasonality. When is it doing things that you want to interact with it? Because we don't interact with our plants every day of every year, or year long. There's just certain times when we get real active with that plant. So this was a nice little illustration from a fellow in France, but just illustrating that even in a grass and tree arrangement, this is a real nice arrangement. The tree's got plenty of room for its roots, but the grasses are coming in and taking up this upper area that's not being utilized by the trees. So that's a nice sharing arrangement. And you want to be thinking of that because there's more biomass underground than there is above ground. So do not be fooled. You're not seeing the whole picture if you're just looking at what's above ground. And then you want to look at your livestock. What do they like to eat? How destructive are they? Do they need a lot of diversity in food? What about the type of food? Is it a high cellulose or is it more green? And what combinations? How big is their mouth? A goat is excellent for brush control, but a little pygmy goat is just going to do pygmy brush control because the goats will eat the diameter of the brush that they will eat is a direct relationship to the size of their jaw. And so if you have some big brush you want to take down, then you're going to want something like the size of a pack goat, big honking goat that you can control. So you're also going to look how far they can reach. Little goats will jump up into trees. So how can they go? What kind of impact do they have? What are their hooves doing, or their feet doing, or their beaks, or their claws? How tractable are they? Tractability is how well can you control them. In a silvopasture, you're likely going to be moving your animals around, and that's birds as well as the four-legged. So if they see you and scream and run, that's not a tractable animal. You know, if you have an ox, for instance, I happen to have an ox, he is extremely large, and so I need to have a breed of ox that I can work with, because I'm not an expert. So I have to have a very gentle, understanding, kind ox, you know, so that I don't get crushed. And so social needs. Do they need a crowd? Do they just need one or two friends? Do they need friends of the same species? What's going to make them happier? And so you have to consider that. And then durability, how long do they live? How long are they useful for your needs? What is your end of life plan for them? And that could be harvest them in a year, and it could be keep them until they're old and die of natural causes. So, and their seasonal needs. And so all of these factors, when you're trying to put a silvopasture together, you want to kind of go down these checklists and sort of figure out what's going to work. And they all have to work together, because you certainly don't want to be planting something and have your geese come by. And geese love to chew on things, anything round they want to chew on, even if they're not going to eat it. And I've had them reach through fences and girdle like a kiwi that big around by just gnawing at it. And I thought the fence was keeping them away, but I wasn't paying close enough attention. It was a 2x4 utility wire fence, and they were sticking their long necks in there. So those goose didn't live long. They had a different seasonality and lifespan than some others. And then how do you integrate? How do you put all these animals and plants and forage all together? And the eyes have it here. It's intentional, it's interactive, it's integrated, and it's intensive. So the silvopasture benefits, and I recognize, and I even apologize, because I know most of you as permaculturists really understand this. And so, but I put this together for people that, regardless of your knowledge level, that it can bring everybody along. So what the silvopasture does is it combines woody, perennial, and annual plants for all those wonderful F words that I came up with. And it also takes advantage of symbiosis. It mimics nature, you know, for the most part. Now, in a place like Kansas in the Midwest, no, you're not going to have, you know, it was never a tree-covered prairie, you know, but there are places to integrate trees at the margins. And so it does take, silvopastures take advantage of symbiosis. It mimics nature, sequesters carbon. Boy, howdy, does it sequester carbon. Minimizes inputs, diversifies outputs, builds on relationships, and it maximizes the photosynthetic productivity, or what we call prime productivity, or primary productivity. And so, and it also is a whole lot less stress on your animals. When they don't, you know, how do you feel when you're working all day, if you have to work in direct sun all day long versus being able to move into the shade and work in the shade and then come back out? You feel a whole lot better. Well, so do your animals when they have that opportunity and option. So this silvopastures provides more of what we want, and I don't need to read the list to you, but you know as a permaculturist that all of these things are very beneficial, and that's what we're trying for, is the multitude of benefits. And I will point out beauty. Beauty is really important. As a landscape architect by training, you can imagine when I started working for the Forest Service back in the late 70s, that when I was fresh out of college and telling these foresters, you have to pay attention to beauty. You know, it was interesting, let me tell you, how to defend beauty in a very, very vociferous way. But a simple example is, what do we value as a society? If you've got a beautiful house versus an ugly house, what are people going to want to gravitate toward? They want the beautiful house. What about your spouse? You want a beautiful spouse. You want a beautiful car. You want a beautiful landscape. You want a beautiful view, you know, real estate. I mean, you can charge a whole lot more if you've got a great view. So beauty is inherent in the human spirit. We want and are attracted to beauty. We place a value on beauty. But as soon as you start to talk about an economic or a business venture, then suddenly beauty, it just disappears or falls off the table. No, not at all. So remember that. Yes, I was also mentioning at the last presentation that I just spoke to a person who said they were a landscape designer and a permaculturist, and they would tell their clients that we're not going to do beauty. Just forget about beauty. And I was like, you're kidding, right? And he said, no, it's got to be functional. And it's like, if it's functional and not beautiful, it sucks and nobody's going to do it, So if you're not going to have clients for very long if you don't produce something beautiful. So, but what is also very exciting about silvopasture, I've known all along that they're very good for carbon drawdown and but I didn't understand how good until recently we had the Drawdown, a new book edited by Paul Hawken, a lot of different contributors. And what they did was look at 81 climate solutions, 81 ways to draw down carbon, and that was actual reduction of carbon, not just moving it around or trading or something like that. And of those 81, well, I don't need to read them. Look at this list. I mean, this is using the numbers out of his list of 81. But look at that. In the top 28, look at all those Permi solutions. These are all things that we do, we advocate, we've learned about, we support. Look at that, silvopasture, number 9. Are you kidding me? Yeah. So I was very excited when I saw this discussion. Yes, Bill?
Ms. Flora, we all actually believe all this stuff, but we would like to send you to Washington so you can take this list of 81 variables and go talk to our president. What's his name? Trump? I think he needs to know this list. Maybe he can memorize it.
Well, I would love to do that. But what breaks my heart is that a lot of people in government know this. They may not know the exact specifics, but they know what's right. They know what's happening out here. This is not called a perturbation, accidental warming. No, it's real. It's climate change, and it's happening. It's here now. And that's what makes us feel a little psychotic. Because we're sitting there watching people that we know better tell us things that are blatantly false.
Well, they know it, but the sad thing about it is that they were formerly able to put this stuff on their websites and so now they're being told to shut up.
Oh yeah,
so
taking it down.
Not only are we not solving the problem, we're making it worse by telling the people who understand the problem, people like you, to shut up. Mm-hmm. That's really
well, and that's why we have to talk to each other. And that's why grassroots and person to person is so important.
In July, I was just at the agroforestry conference in Virginia Tech. Eric was a keynote speaker, and he wrote Carbon Farming.
Right, Eric, yeah.
An intern of mine, and I was a speaker there.
Wow.
Right after him, and they had a third of the presenters were permaculture people, and now they're opening up their doors. And NRCS. Universities are because they have no solutions. Mm-hmm. So they're looking at permaculture people to come up with solutions.
Absolutely.
And again, you have this thing with that, there's a gag order out there too. Mm-hmm. So there was a door opened up a little bit, now it's trying to be closed again. Who knows where it's going to go.
And I don't think, as a former agency person, I do not believe that having having an anti-science administration. You can say what you want about agency people, but agency people pretty much dedicate their life to public service, and they're real serious about it. And I can tell you that I could probably name off 200 Forest Service people right now who are actively working against the administration's anti-climate attitude.
Oh, yeah, all the
And
professionals. And we
it's-
went on several field trips. Unfortunately, only one of them was very far along. Most of them were just little sticks in the ground. But we did go to one that was 20 years old or 15 years old. And it was walnuts in one paddock and honey locusts in another paddock. And they were kind of, they were doing all kinds of testing to see how happy the sheep were. They had special microphones and they were doing all kinds of, because, when the sheep, they were finding out that sheep were just having such a good time eating and then sitting in the shade and communing like they should, instead of being in the sun all stressed out.
Yeah, and just, I think it was the University of Virginia that put out, I just saw a study come out probably in the last couple of weeks, that it's 20% more efficient digestion and use of forage when you have shade, when you have a silvopasture, because the animals are so much less stressed. They spend a lot more time laying down, and they graze throughout the day. When it gets really hot, sometimes the animals just stand there like, ugh, And so, you have happier animals, which means a healthier animal, which means a more nutritious animal, and
less disease, probably.
less disease, I would guess, and
More money.
make more money. And when we have livestock, what we're doing is basically enslaving another species to do our bidding to serve us. And so there's a very high level of responsibility.
Imprison them.
Exactly, we imprison them. Well, not all of us. Some of us have, we put up with the goose crap on the front walkway, tell our friends, just step around it, it won't hurt you. But we do. We imprison them and we demand things from them. So it's our responsibility, I think, as a
Dealer.
I
think that's super unfair. That's hurting my feelings to hear you guys talk about animals like this.
Well, wait a minute. I'm not done.
Okay.
Because if we try to do that, then we have an obligation, a moral obligation, to make those animals and help those animals be as happy and fulfilled as possible. Thank you. Yeah, that's where I was going with that. Now,
It's also important to note that these animals have been bred by us for thousands of years, literally, to be our help maidens or our help animals.
Right,
They're
and-
domesticated. They're bred to work with us. And they can't live without us for the most part.
this is true, but it does not negate our moral responsibility to give them the best life that we possibly can, which means good nutrition, the social needs that they have, all of that, it's just really important. And so silvopasture is part of that scenario, because we're making their life easier and more comfortable.
Sorry, just to add, I really like the term stewardship. And I think that is really
Yeah, we should be stewarding our animals, not
Jailers, you mean?
keeping them.
One thing I didn't see is the connection with manure and how the manure feeds back into all.
I think it was nutrient cycling or something, I think, was the benefit of that. But thank you, because I was shocked. A friend of mine, who I thought knew better, was saying, I tried something new at the farmer's market. I just shoveled up, a bunch of sheep manure into bags and was selling it. And they're like, you're selling your manure? What? And then in the next breath, she was talking about the need for pasture restoration.
And she was buying alfalfa pellets for her garden,
Yeah, it's funny how we've been inculcated to think in certain ways, and that's what's so wonderful about perminess is that we open our minds and start seeing everything as a cycle and connected and interconnected and feeding. There's no linear production line in nature. Everything is a circle. Everything is a cycle. What nature breaks down, it becomes building blocks for the next thing. So,
From the point of view of traditional horticulture, you can't have full cycle without animals. It's all designed to work with animals. Many of us who are just growing crops and trees and fruit and stuff, we only have half of the equation without the animal cycling.
Even the rabbits, for me, rabbits and chickens, ducks, it closes that cycle, and I've got a cut and carry. Those systems work all over the world, cut and carry. You don't have to have your animals running around necessarily. You cut them and carry them, and you can have them, they're not destructive.
Yep.
There's all kinds of variation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the interesting things about silvopasture, and I might reference this later on, but I just want to tell you the story because I think it's so cool. There's a great little magazine called Agroforestry News, and you order it through Permaculture Design magazine, and it comes out, I think, every other month. It's from...
They featured my greenhouse in one of those.
Did they? Oh, yeah, they did.
Yeah, remember that?
Yes, I do.
Somebody built a tropical greenhouse in England off of our design.
That's fantastic. Yeah, great little magazine. It's just in black and white and mimeographed, you know. But anyhow, it had an article in there that absolutely had me tingling. I get excited about unusual things. And it was how Norwegians, through history, utilize silvopasture, because they don't have the volume of land or the open pasture to just grow hay and cut it. So what they were doing was a combination of coppicing and pollarding. And so the large trees that they would leave in their pastures, they would pollard about on a 5-year schedule, and then they would lease land in the forest, the public land, and they would coppice shrubs in the forest, gather that up, bind it, and use it as winter fodder. They'd bind it and dry it and use it as winter feed. And you can train your animals to get used to that.
They love it.
They do. And
all kinds of minerals in it.
well, and stuff like locust, because you've also got the seed pods in there.
Bark is full of nutrients.
Absolutely.
Whenever
It's just...
you let the cattle into a new pasture, they stampede to the trees to reach every leaf they can. The roots go so much deeper and bring up minerals that they...
And it's a different, there's more cellulose in that. And like I have Navajo churro sheep, and those churros are the sheep, the native sheep that, or not native, but the sheep that the Navajos would raise to get that really nice wool for their rugs, but also they tend to eat more like goats, meaning they browse more, they like a lot of cellulose. So I'm in a forested environment, so I want, I had goats for a while, but in this particular setting, sheep are better for me, but I wanted a sheep that was a heritage breed that I was helping to maintain and propagate, but also because they were after the cellulose. And so they'll eat let them into an area that I want to thin, and they'll girdle the small trees, which is what I'm looking for, drop those, and they'll eat all the needles and small branches and strip off the bark. And so all I have to do is knock off the branches, which I can make into biochar, and then I have a stripped log sitting there. So.
Jackie and Mark Kretowitz are writing a book on coppicing right now.
Oh, they are?
Yeah, they just had a big podcast, and I watched
Good.
Mark was an intern for mine for about a year.
All right. Excellent. Excellent.
So how do you deal with fencing then in the forest?
Multiple ways. It's very difficult. We've tried it in a number of different ways. And with sheep, it's even more difficult because sheep don't pay attention to electric fences unless it's the electric net. And even then...
And then it's impossible.
Yeah, then you shut out a lot of other things. One of the options, and I want to find Delilah, I think her name is. She did a dog presentation, I think earlier today. I really want a tending dog. A tending dog, and German Shepherds are some of the best tending dogs. A tending dog is not a herding dog. A herding dog will move your animals around for you, but it keeps them in a certain spot. You set out cones or flagging, and the dog will keep your animals within that zone. I don't care if I have to pay $1,000 or $1,500 for that dog and another $1,000 to train me on how to
Worth it.
treat the dog. It's
Worth it.
cheaper from a resource use, from pain and anguish, from maintenance, the whole thing. So I'm real hot on tending dogs. Yes.
I just want to throw out there, she's my wife.
Is she?
You meet her.
Oh, good. Please do. Yeah.
You meet her.
Good. Because
Talk to you about it.
I was just like,
This is one of the directions we want to go. We just bought 7.5 acres.
Mm-hmm.
That's heavily forested, but heavily compacted because the guy who owned the place had an infatuation with heavy equipment.
oh Lord.
So he's got, like, any flat spot was a landing pad. And in some cases, he even put gravel down.
Oh, how convenient.
What we started with was putting the pigs on the gravel. Mm-hmm. Just letting them do whatever they could do with it. You know, one of the things we're looking at is that we have to keep, we have a 3-acre perimeter fence, but we have, we want to do things like, I love the pigs running around free. Nobody likes it when they're running around free on the front porch at 6 a.m. So, and getting into stuff and everything, but what we're looking at is how are we going to keep these animals safe and in the forested areas where we want them. And we're looking at, we have friends who want us to raise sheep for them because they want the wool. They're artisanal weavers. And we want to have a Dexter milk cow. And then pigs and chickens. I'm really down with ducks and geese, but and rabbits. And
Excellent.
pigs and chickens. And we want them all, my vision is that they're all in a pasture area together, doing their thing. And then when I want to move them, generally what I do is I walk out there. If they think I'm their source of food, they don't think I'm in their jail or they think I wait on them. So when they see me, they
Oh, the
follow.
waiter's here.
But this is one of the things we're working on, is keeping them safe and keeping them where we want them, and we want them there. I
Absolutely.
hate electric fences. I've got them on my pigs right now, and one of the pigs just walks through it because he doesn't care. The other one's a lot more cautious and won't follow him. But I don't like electric fences at all. We maybe have to make the perimeter fence hot, to keep the bears out. But as far as having things inside the perimeter fence, I really don't want to walk around and deal with electric fences.
Yeah.
One of the things we're looking at is, and we have a Great Pyrenees Anatoly Shepherd cross right now that is becoming more of a cart dog than a protection dog. But we're looking at, raising dogs that basically will tend.
Yeah. I can't say enough about the value of dogs. I mean, I have livestock guardian dogs, and I've had livestock in top predator areas. Where I lived in Montana, we had wolves, grizzly bear, cougar, and every other predator right on the property, walking through the property. Yeah, and we fenced in a human zone. We did just a big elk fence, and we called that the human zone. And we had all of us in there, all the poultry and the dogs, and the goats were outside. And that was good because we wanted them to be dealing with forest brush, but they were free range, 24/7. But they knew that if there was a predator around, all they needed to do was come up and stand next to the fence, and the dogs, and you need more than one dog. When you're in that kind of a habitat, you need multiple dogs because two dog voices, a predator is going to think twice because they'll hear one and they go, I think I can take that one on. Judging by the sound, the size, etc., I think I can handle that one. If there's two, they go, uh-oh, one in the front, one in the back, I'm going to get hurt, can't hunt, I die. And so our goats learned very quickly to just come up and stand next to the fence when there was a predator. And what we found in very short order is the mule deer also learned. So we knew when there was a predator around because you'd suddenly have a bunch of goats and deer standing right next to the fence, of the human zone. So anyhow, yeah, the fencing issue, it's a big one. And, electric fence, some people like it. Hercules, my ox, he's 2,700 pounds, 6'4" at the shoulder, and I can use 2 hot wires to keep him in, and which is amazing because he could blast through my entire garage, the barn, and every fence I have if he wanted to, very easily. And so tractability goes back to trainability, and can you train your animals to be calm to like having you around, or at least accept having you around? And can you provide them with enough entertainment and food to keep them where you want to keep them? And so, yes,
I've done
Drum.
that with cats. I have 2 working cats on an acre. I have no chipmunk problems, no ground squirrel problems, no tree squirrel problems, and they don't eat the birds.
Beautiful.
And that's just because, I've created paradise and everything is harmonic now.
Exactly.
Cats, one is working and one is sleeping.
Yeah,
My cat's
it's
the same way, but I'm just wondering about like if you put your goats in, the forest and they see your fruit trees over there, they ain't sticking in that forest for very long. You know what I mean? And even if you have an electric fence, goats don't care. They don't care about any fence. You know what I mean?
and that's why you have to keep them entertained. And and I had goats for 15 years.
You change
and
the sheep, they're easier to keep in with electric fence or otherwise?
I didn't try electric on the goats or the sheep.
Oh, really?
No, because I don't think it works that well with goats or sheep. So I never went that route.
So how'd you keep them entertained then out there?
Well, they were in the woods, and so they had, and then they had the elk fence, and my fruit trees were inside in the human zone, and so they just knew they couldn't get in. It was like a deer fence or whatever, and so they didn't try. But you interact with them a lot. My ox, because he's single, I always make sure he's where he can see us. I actually moved his corral really close to the house, so he can watch us. He can watch the sheep, the kitties. All the animals are all around him, and we go out and spend time with him every day. And likewise with the goats. They like interaction and they like attention, and so that was one of the ways that we dealt with the goats. My goats were also pack goats. They love to go for walks, so it's like, okay, come with mom, we're going for a walk, and they'd line up, and I had one goat that she would get my thigh kind of right between her shoulder and her jawbone, and just get my thigh right in there and just walk alongside me, kind of glued to my side, because she just liked me,
You use it for weed control?
Yeah, weed and brush.